Hi, welcome back to the now third in the series on a brief timeline of the secular study of religion in the United States, where we're looking at how religious studies became part of American history and how it's related to the study of Christianity. Last time we were talking about the Niagara Bible Conference and the beginning of fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is a movement within Christianity that is a back to the fundamentals kind of movement. It becomes very narrowly focused and literalistic in its interpretation of Scripture. It also is going to be connected to certain versions of creation, early Earth, or a young Earth creationism. I'm going to go on to discuss some of the secularizing of American thought and how that connects with the church. So William James is a professor at Harvard. Remember, Harvard was the first university started in the New World. Harvard by this time has become secular, mostly. He writes a book called Varieties of Religious Experience. William James is a naturalist, a materialist, and he just explores religious experience in this book, all different kinds of experience. And this introduces a new category for religious studies. Perhaps we can just say religion is based on the kind of experience you have. People believe because of their experience. But this is also connected to what's called empiricism. William James is an empiricist. All of our knowledge is through the senses, through experience. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. But religious experience is none of those. It's an internal, intuitive, mystical experience. And remember, no experience is meaningful without interpretation. In this book, we see people from many different religions having experience. It doesn't tell us the truth about any of those religions, but it does become a new category for study for religious studies scholars. In 1904, 1905, Max Weber, a German sociologist, writes a book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, where he tries to outline how capitalism is born out of a Protestant work ethic. It's a very interesting book. Some people think it's accurate, some not. Max Weber has a kind of pessimistic view on human nature. He is also influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche, but it gives you an interesting interpretation of how the New World became wealthy. So if you're interested in capitalism, and I don't know, I've read the book several times. Sometimes I think he's onto something. Sometimes I think there's something fishy in his interpretation. But it's definitely a key piece, and it's a key piece in the sociology of religion, understanding what happened in Christianity from a sociological perspective. So I encourage you to check that out. Emil Durkheim is also a German sociologist. He is going to go a little more broadly in his studies. He's going to talk about elementary forms of religious life and try to make sort of universal categories for religion based on what he's observing through groups of people. But it's definitely a secular study of religion. So sociology is starting to grow as a secular academic discipline. In 1910 to 1915, again, the fundamentals are, let me see if this gives us the fundamentals we're looking for. Not really. This is coming out of fundamentalism, a little bit more about fundamentalism, and the Bible College of Los Angeles is started. Now, a Bible college is influenced by fundamentalism. This is now Biola in California, which is a very prominent Christian university right now, and they have Talbot as the graduate school. I know a lot of people who have gone to Biola. It's a reputable Christian college, but it has roots back in the fundamentalist controversy, let's say. And then you can see right around the same time, we have World War I happening. And this is going to be the beginning of the secular wars of religion. That's what I call them. We had the secular wars. We had the wars of religion. Now we have the secular wars. 100 years. Maybe we're still in it. Maybe we're still part of this time of secular wars. But it's been 100 years. So World War I, the Europeans are at war, and the United States has to get involved. Back at home, after that, we have the Scopes trial. The Scopes trial is where, I gotta look up his name. Let's see. John T. Scopes was accused of violating Tennessee's Butler Act, which made it unlawful to teach human evolution in any state-funded school. So even back then, the state schools were teaching a creation account from Scripture. Mr. Scopes was introducing an evolutionary account of the origins of humans. So we have the beginning of the creation versus evolution debate. The Scopes trial is a very public trial, and it makes the fundamentalists look bad. There's an interesting book. I wonder if I gave you a link to it. I did not. I think it's called The Twilight of the Gods. That is an account of the Scopes trial, blow by blow. I read it in one of my religious studies classes. I think it was called Evangelicalism in America. I read that book. But you can click here for more background. There's a movie on the Scopes trial that isn't very flattering. I forget the name of the movie too. Look, I'm forgetting all this stuff. I'm doing this off the cuff. Okay, so you can look up more, but that's the beginning of the creation evolution debate, and we're still that debate is still live, let's just say. That's part of the challenge, an external challenge to Christianity today. In 1929, we have the founding of Westminster Theological Seminary by J. Gresham Machen, who fought against modernism. What happened was Princeton Theological Seminary and Princeton College became liberal. Remember, liberal Christianity. And professors from Princeton Seminary founded a new seminary, Westminster Theological Seminary. This is in the eastern one. There's a western one in California as well. Machen was a professor at Princeton Theological who left, and he was probably one of the last of the Princeton scholars who was fighting against this influx of modern ideas from Europe, Darwin, Marx, Freud, and the biblical criticism of Germany. After Machen, I'm going to argue there's an anti-intellectualism that takes hold. Fundamentalism and anti-intellectualism. The unwillingness, lack of desire to think critically and argue well against bad ideas. That anti-intellectualism becomes part of fundamentalist Christianity. And I'm going to say it's a very bad thing. So Machen was an intellectual. After him, Westminster gains a reputation, but it becomes a particular branch of Reformed teaching associated with Cornelius Van Til and his presuppositional approach. Presuppositionalism is a reaction to modernism that basically says you have to assume the truth of Christianity. We don't prove it. And that becomes very influential. It's still influential today. Okay, 1939 to 1945, we have World War II. So World War I, World War II. World War II is Nazism and the Holocaust. And during this time, actually before this, 1933, there's an influx of Jewish intellectual immigrants coming to the United States to escape persecution in Germany. and they get jobs in the German model universities. So there are a lot of German Jewish scholars who come and influence the university and become religious studies teachers and sociology teachers. And one of the places they become prominent is at the Frankfurt School in the college in New York, the New School. I think it's called the New School now, but back then it was associated with Columbia University in New York. Okay, 1947 to 1991, the Cold War, the United States and Russia, communism, and we are hoping to keep it from a hot war and nuclear war. So World War II ends with the nuclear holocaust. The Cold War, there's a threat, mutual assured destruction. We have nukes, the United States has nukes, Russia has nukes, and if we both threaten to use them, that cancels each other out, right? But you can see that there's this growing threat in the world. The secular, scientific world is becoming dangerous and scary. Technology is on the rise. Now, from the 1950s to the 1980s, we have the rise of the scientific study of religion in the universities in the United States, starting with a scholar named Mircea Eliade at the University of Chicago. The purpose of the study of religion is training and practice in directing and conducting inquiry regarding the subject of religion, and prescribed modes and techniques of inquiry to make the subject of religion intelligible. That's from a religious studies book that I sometimes use by Walter Capps. So the scientific study of religion, what is that? How do you study religion scientifically? Well, that's where we get the sociology of religion and the anthropology of religion. And so at this time, the discipline starts to emerge, and we get religious studies departments in colleges. And it becomes something you could major in. Christianity is one among many religions that you can study. So you can see that Christianity is not as popular. Now, also, there have been waves of immigration. Catholics from Ireland, from Italy, Jews from Germany and other places that are being persecuted. And then we're going to see a rise in immigrants from India, Pakistan, and then all over the world. So 1990 to 1991 was the first Iraq war. After 2001, we're going to see an increase in immigration after the Middle East. There's persecution of religious people there. They find refuge here. 2001, we have 9/11 happening. And also 9/11 makes religious studies scholars aware that there is religious extremism on the rise. And there's a rethinking of the secularization theory with the growth of religion worldwide, especially within Islam and evangelicalism. Let me tell you a little bit about that. So the attack on the Trade Center and the Pentagon were religiously motivated by extreme versions of Islam. And people become more aware that, hey, Islam is becoming very popular, powerful, and attractive to a lot of people. And it's growing. And evangelicalism is, let's just say, is what becomes of Christianity. Evangelicalism is sort of a non-denominational brand of Christianity that is influenced by fundamentalism. Evangelicalism is a broad category, but it is growing in Latin America, in China, in Africa, and religious studies scholars become puzzled by this because their secularization theory, so notice a theory, says that religion is supposed to contract and become less influential as secularism grows. So secularization theory says that science will push out religion. Science will grow, people will become more educated, we won't need religion anymore, and religion will go away. They start to realize, oh, maybe our theory is laden with our own assumptions that religion is not true. And so it'll go away because the truth of science will become evident to everyone. Also, in postmodern theory, science becomes another grand narrative that is put next to religion. So you have religions as some stories and science as another story of making sense of the world. So science becomes categorized almost as a religion in the postmodern period, and secularization theory has been critiqued by the postmoderns, like saying, hey, you're smuggling in your assumptions in your own theory. You're predicting the very thing you're hoping will happen, and it's not happening. Look at the evidence on the ground. So religion isn't going away, it's growing, and it may be growing more radical forms. 2003 to 2016 is the second Iraq War, and the related fallout. Islam becomes a concern for the study in the academy. I wrote this timeline probably in 2016 and stopped there. Islam becomes a concern because we need to understand Islam better. It's a new area for us to study in religious studies. Not just that, but why are these people becoming radicalized? Why the extremism? Why are there fundamentalist versions of Islam? So by this time, you have pretty much what we have now. I have not been in religious studies as a student since, let's say, 2014. So I'm not sure what the trends are now, but I can tell you largely in the academy, the trends are an application of critical theory to all areas of life, to culture. So right now, religion is suspicious. Christianity is suspicious to critical theory, which is an alternative interpretation that connects to Marx and Freud and Nietzsche and Darwin. So naturalistic interpretations of reality become dominant in the academy, and those interpretive models are now used for looking at Christianity. So if Christianity isn't true, as naturalism would say, then it must be something like a power struggle. So we have the will to power again. Christians are using their religion to dominate other people and oppress them. It's a fiction that they've convinced a lot of people is true, and now it's used to oppress. So that's where we are now in the academic study of religion. Christians need to take this history seriously and either come up with a response or what? End. That's my advice. Christians, if you want to survive as a cohesive religion, you must come up with responses to the challenges of skepticism, of science, of modernity and postmodernity, which includes all the philosophers, and this new critical theory interpretation that's very popular with young people right now. Okay, I've given you some related topics that go over what I just mentioned. History of immigration, so you can see who brought their religions to the United States. It's a story of how the United States went from being predominantly Protestant Christian to pluralistic and multicultural. Very interesting study. Also, the rise of new religious movements. There are a lot of religions that were born in the United States, such as Latter-day Saints, Christian Science, Scientology, lots of new religious movements, and they come around the same time out of New York, 1800s. Okay, I've given you some further readings if you're interested in this. Sidney Alstrom, A Religious History of the American People. Talal Assad, who gives formations of the secular. He talks about this secular process. Christian Smith, I mentioned this one earlier, The Secular Revolution, very interesting book. Charles Taylor, A Secular Age, and Molly Worthen, Apostles of Reason, and this is about the crisis of authority in American evangelicalism, and you'll see how some of the intellectuals attempted to defend Christianity against liberalism and came up short. So, this ends the brief timeline related to the secular study of religion in the United States. It wasn't very brief, was it? So thank you for joining me, and I hope that you will be curious and pursue some of these topics further and continue thinking. Thanks for joining me.